for all.
Good evening, everyone. First up on our agenda, we have a public hearing, House of Prayer and Worship, 365 Hill Street. Joe.
Good evening.
Mike, do you have any comments?
I don't. This is on for public hearing. All the zoning comments have been addressed. All the other issues were submitted, I think, a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, and I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rich?
All engineering comments have been addressed.
Excellent, thank you. And Pat?
And all site planning issues have been addressed, and you have a approval resolution before you for this evening.
Very good. All right,
Just for the record, Mr. Chairman, we have submitted our bond, and the town engineer has approved it, and we agreed to it.
Very good. So I'll open this up for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to be heard?
Mr. Chairman, as there are no public comments, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll offer the resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 21-08, August 12, 2021, tax map number 64.6-1-14, House of Prayer and Worship, final site plan.
Thank you. All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy this heat. It's going to end soon.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Good luck.
Okay, next on the agenda is also a public hearing, New York Fuel Distributors LLC, Cocoa Farms, 1923 Route 6, Carmel. Good evening. Good evening. Mr. Chairman, how are you? Okay. Mike, you have any
I
comments?
re-inspected the property on July 20th. All signs that were installed on the pylons were removed. I have no objection to the return of the bond.
Okay. Rich?
All engineering comments have been addressed.
Thank you. Pat?
No issues on the bond, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Okay, what I'll do is I will open up the floor to any, the public hearing, to any public comment. If anyone who wishes to speak, please come up to the podium.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note that the applicant was so excited to have his bond returned, he came last evening to the town board meeting thinking that he was at a public hearing. So
That's next.
I just wanted the board to know that, so.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.
Anyone wish to be heard?
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do I have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now you'll have to go before the town board to get your bond. Good
Well, I
luck.
say
Thank you.
your next step is this goes to the town board, and then it gets approved, or hopefully approved at that point in time. There's no reason why it shouldn't, but.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is DPL Realty LLC, 102 Glenida Avenue, Carmel, residential site plan.
Evening.
Good evening. Mike, you want to start?
Yeah, they went to the zoning board last month and they received their use variance to allow the expansion and the 3 area variances, and they are noted on the plat.
Okay, thank you. Rich?
There was, the applicant noted that the referral to Putnam County for planning GML 239M is required. Otherwise, all engineering comments have been addressed.
Okay. And Rich? I'm sorry, Pat?
And Mr. Chairman, all site planning issues were previously addressed on this, and the big issue, the use variance, was, as Mike indicated, was granted. So you're free to move to the next step, and this process would be scheduling a public hearing.
Are we squared away with parking here? parking size and? is
Yes,
there
so
anything
the
else required?
plan had been revised the last time they presented it to you. The sizes, the space sizes have been clarified, and the new parking area has been clarified on the plan as well.
Okay.
I think the zoning board preferred the number of parking spaces to be compliant and allowed it to go down to the 9-foot width at that point, so.
So we'll be with 9 by 18 then on this?
That's
Correct, yes. So just for clarity, the 3 parking spaces that you see off the side of the driveway, those are new proposed parking spaces. Those are designed to meet the zoning standard. It's just the existing parking spaces that have been there forever that the applicant seeks to continue to use that will be at the 9 by 18 dimension variance, again, granted last month.
Okay. Any comments from anyone on the board? Any questions? No? Okay. Okay, then, the next step here, I'll need a motion to schedule a public hearing.
I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing on this applicant.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is Hirsch, Stacy Hirsch, 311 Drewville Road, for site plan. Good evening. How are you?
Hi.
Mike?
Yeah, at the last meeting, we discussed the cleaning, disinfecting of the, I don't want to say stalls, but whatever they keep the dogs in. Everything was discussed, but we really need to get those details on the plan so we can make sure that this is the way they're going to continue to do it. I think they said there were no chemicals used, just household cleaners.
Yep, just regular household
Yep.
cleaners.
So that should be on the plan, so that this way, no other chemicals are getting down into the DEP watershed that's at the bottom of the hill there. The plan, variances were granted for 2 AIO width, lot area, parking spaces, and lot width. And the engineer needs to provide floor plans for the structure. He did get them to me afterwards, but they're still not clearly labeled. He should label each room and what they are and how many dogs are going to be in each room. This way, it's crystal clear for us when we're doing our final review of the plat.
Okay.
Rich?
The applicant noted a comment and forwarded plans to Carmel Fire Department. Otherwise, all engineering comments have been addressed.
Okay. Pat?
And like the last application, Mr. Chairman, they've addressed all the site planning issues. What Mike noted would also be reflected in conditions of approval if you ever get to that point. And the next step in this application would also be scheduling a public hearing.
Okay, so we can move with the public hearing based on conditions of approval?
Yeah, the issue Mike
Next time,
raised would be
it comes
conditions
back.
anyway. Yeah.
So we can proceed with scheduling the public hearing, but please make sure these comments are picked up, addressed, and put onto the plat, okay?
Yes.
It's just labeling the rooms. They're there. I just need to know where the dogs are going to be and where the dogs aren't going to be, to be honest with you.
And the cleaning
That's
problem.
fine.
And the cleaning. That should be noted on the plat itself, yes.
Any comments from anyone on the board? Questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that this application be scheduled for a public hearing.
Okay.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is MCSS Self-Storage, 155 Hutchinson Avenue, Carmel, waiver site plan application.
Good evening. I don't know whether,
Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll do
okay, very well. My name's Richard O'Rourke. I'm with the law firm of Keenan Bean. We have offices in White Plains, Fishkill, and New York City. And the application before you is for the repurposing of an existing building that, of course, has already received site plan approval. It was a warehouse. And what we're proposing to do is to make it into a self-storage facility. And so the parking requirements we believe to be different for self-storage than what was previously approved for a warehouse. Your code provides for the requirement that if it's a self-storage, that there be one parking spot for every 10,000 square feet of self-storage. If it were another use, such as the one that was there previously, the requirement is that there should be one parking spot for every 1,000 feet. So logic dictates that that makes sense, because obviously with self-storage, there's very limited parking. So with that, my client is out of Miami, Florida, and his architect is out of Chicago. And so I received Mike's letter of August 10th this week, and I've had the opportunity to speak with Mike about it. And I recognize that, notwithstanding the fact that we're not changing the building at all, we're not changing the footprint of the building, we're installing interior renovations with an elevator so that we could accommodate space that we will be building internal to the building. Internally, the building will go from approximately 30, I don't want to misquote myself here, we're going to approximately double the floor space interior, because we're putting in the second floor for the boxes that are customary in self-storage. And so with that, I did receive Mike's letter, and I note that the code does provide, it says, in the event of a change of the use of the site plan from self-storage to a permitted use, provisions must be shown for parking of one space for every 1,000 square feet. We're not moving from self-storage to warehouse or another use. We are proposing the previously approved site plan for a warehouse that, pursuant to your code, there is a provision for a waiver of site plan review if in fact there's no exterior renovation, and obviously there's a different parking requirement, much less parking is required. So with that, what I've asked for, not only for a waiver, but I spoke with Mike today about it, I'd also request a waiver from the requirement of showing parking for a use that we're not proposing, and it's on property that was previously approved for a warehouse. So in essence, we're going to have, according to your code, under self-storage, we're going to have more parking there than what is required. So hence my applications for a waiver of the site plan, as well as a waiver of having to engage an engineer and an architect to do a layout for a plan that we're not proposing. So,
Thank you.
So is the, I'm sorry.
Before the question, I would just want to go to the consultants, get their input
Yep,
on this.
you got it.
Then we'll open the floor to questions. Mike, you want to start, please?
The applicant proposes to renovate the existing storage building in the CBP zoning district to a two-story self-storage use, which is allowed by right in the CBP zoning district. 15633G requires that the applicant show the board that this property can be developed and provide parking at a ratio of 1 space per 1,000. That is in case, well, I'll read the whole thing to you if you want. You want that section? I pulled it out.
Please, yes.
It says, off-street parking shall be provided, and there shall be one spot for every 10,000 square feet of storage area. That's for a self-storage facility. In addition, the owner shall submit a plan which establishes that in the event of a change of use of the site from self-storage to a permitted use, provisions can be made for the parking at a ratio of 1 space for every 1,000 square feet of building, which parking shall be shown on both the areas the owner intends to pave as well as areas not paved. So my reading of this is that they have to show us that they can comply with the code, which they obviously do, because they had already developed it to 1 per 1,000 of the smaller building, which is the same building but only 1 story. Now they're doing 2 stories, so they're fully within compliance of the code, but they have to show the board, in my opinion, that they can put the 1 parking spot per 1,000 on this site. It's just a density thing to make sure that they're not over, right? I mean, that's pretty much why it was written into the code that way, but that's up to the board to decide.
And the one spot per 1,000 would be.
Which would be the normal storage
For
of
storage.
everything else in the town, but self-storage is 1 for every 10,000, because it's not used, and why make somebody overpave a parking area that they may never use?
Do they comply with the 1 per 1,000 currently?
They didn't submit that plan.
They do comply with the 1 per 10,000, though.
They do comply with 1 per 10, for
Yes.
which means self-storage.
That's correct.
Our code wants the provision, requires the provision to be 1 per 1,000, should the use change.
Well, when I see in addition, that makes me think that also, besides what you're required to put in addition, you need to show us that you can do 1 per 1,000 for the entire site.
One other question, and I'm sorry for being,
No, you're fine.
if I'm being dense. In the terms of the site plan that was approved for the current use, was parking shown, and was parking shown to be compliant with the 1 per 1,000?
1 per 1,000. It was, but it was a 1-story building. And now it's going to be, or 1.5 story, we'll call, 1 1/4, whatever
So
it
the
is.
storage
It's
is
1
going
story
up.
with a
Storage
mezzanine.
is going up.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
partial second floor in part of the building, but the
Right.
whole building
Got it,
doesn't.
got it.
Now there's going to be a second floor on the entire, so it would probably be a few more spots that they would have to show in the grass, not develop them, but show us that they can develop them if need be. That's
So you're
my
saying
reading
if they revert from self-storage back to warehouse and have double the square footage, that's when that would have, you'd have to show that they could have the 1 per
It's
1,000.
not a code section I love, but I didn't write it, I just have to.
But would that trigger?
We don't disagree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm focusing on is the language where it says a change of the use of the site from self-storage to a permitted use, then we would have to show. And what I'm saying is, we're not moving from self-storage to,
Right, but I
we're
think-
going the other way around.
Respectfully, I think you're missing the purpose. I've been on this planning board for many, many years, and I understand my role to be not only to look at what you're doing today, but what could happen tomorrow with that piece of property. And I think what this code is speaking to is, yes, the current owner, you're gonna have self-storage, but that same space could be cleared of self-storage and could become a traditional warehouse at some point. So I interpret this code to mean, if that should happen down the road, is there going to be ample parking? Now, they're not saying that you need to provide that parking, they're just saying you need to have a drawing that shows that you could provide that parking. I mean, personally, I don't see that as
So now,
a
Actually,
burdensome.
good
I'm
question.
sorry, I just want to cut it, but I'd like to just continue with the
Sorry.
comments from our consultants, and then we'll have an open discussion on it.
Sure,
So, Rich,
absolutely.
Mike, I'm sorry, you're done?
Yeah, that was the end.
Rich?
Until the information is submitted, the waiver should not be granted, is all I said at the end.
So, yeah, there, as long as there's no changes being made to the site, the engineering department has no comments, but just to follow up, in order to show those parking, the applicant needs to understand that this went through a rigorous review with regulatory agencies in the past, meaning the DEP in essence. So, in order, you can't just show parking on a drawing, right, and which would be fine. It's going to have to meet the criteria that maybe the DEP is going to have to weigh in on. So I know we wanted to have an open discussion. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Cote's comment.
Thank you. Pat?
So just to summarize, so I agree with Mike's interpretation in this case, and I think we may have seen this once before, many, many years ago, and I think the intention of this provision was self-storage facilities at the time were typically multi-building facilities with orange doors on them. So I think that the idea was if someone were to make this change, put a bunch of additional buildings in, and then convert back, do you still have parking because you put a bunch of buildings with orange doors all over the site? I think that's the intent of this provision. So show us if it happens. And I think it's the in addition language that requires the applicant to provide this for you at this point. It's, as what Ray just said, this is not an engineered site plan. It's a geometric site plan showing 10 by 20 spaces, the number that's required. It's not an engineered site plan, so it's a relatively easy task to do. And I would agree with Mike that the applicant should probably provide that for you. You can certainly consider waiving that provision. There's also one other provision in that ordinance which speaks to the operational characteristics of the facility, that there would not be dead-end storage and other various prohibitions. Those would be conditions of approval. But Rick, you should probably provide a affirmative statement saying that you would comply with those specific criteria that's in this section of the code.
I think we did already, but let me double check.
And that's
we
not,
have no
that's not an issue for them. That would be simply a condition of approval.
That'd be condition.
And by the way, just to repeat, The idea of what they're proposing on the site is fine. No objections to this. If it weren't for this parking issue, I would recommend the waiver without any hesitation.
But I do disagree with one thing. I don't think that they need to do the engineering and the DEP yet, because it says, show them, but don't build them. So they're just showing that they could potentially do it if they have to, because if they have to come back and they change the use, they're going to be back here for a site plan. So I think what it is a dimensional thing, as Pat was saying, where they have to lay it out, but don't build it. Just show us that you can build it if you ever need to. And then at that point, they would have to go DEP, DEC, whoever else has jurisdiction over it, in my opinion. That's,
And obviously, it would have to be realistic. You couldn't show us those spaces in the middle of a wetland or something like that on the side of a cliff. It would be obvious to us you're putting him in a reasonable location. But you don't, I don't think you have to engineer it.
Right, so all I'll say is, I'll agree with Mike and Pat on this, you have to show it geometrically. However, the site has constraints. Be aware of that, because in the future, when this goes to get moved and it wants to go and change, whether it's sold by the current owner or it's still owned by the current owner, that's going to be a restriction on that property. So they should think about it now and do it wisely. Maybe they don't have to engineer it, but do it correctly now, so at least it's done and it has thought behind it now before you go and think about it 20 years from now or 3 years from now. That would be the suggestion. The thing went through a rigorous review. It went through DEP approvals. They are the seven-headed giga monster you're going to have to deal with in the future, not the town of Carmel, okay? Deal with it now, at least geometrically, to understand if it can be done. That's all I'm saying.
Good advice. All right, questions from the board?
No,
Did you have a?
no, I'm good.
So for Rich, and Pat, I guess, as well, understanding your concerns, Rich, about DP and any other agency that might have jurisdiction, is the showing of the geometrical ability to comply with parking spaces, does that, I mean, I'm asking this for the record, does that at all lock in a position on the planning board if at some point they do decide to go back to a single warehouse structure and there are DEP issues, there are other issues, who knows, wouldn't want it thrown up in our face that, hey, you approved this several years ago and you thought it was okay and now you're saying it's not okay?
That's a question I think Joe Charbonneau and or Pat are better off. All I'm recommending is that they consider it. It can be thrown, anything you can and say will be used against you, sir, right? That's how it works, right? So I don't know. I mean, it can, you know, probably not, because it would still have to go through the other regulatory approvals, and then they'll say yay or nay to it, and then it won't be our problem. And I don't mean to, you know, be flippant about it.
Remember the context of what we're talking about. We're talking about demonstrating that to allow for a waiver. So in fact, you're not approving that layout in any way. You're waiving it. And only when they came back to you in the future to build that theoretical layout would they have to obtain site plan approval. So I don't think you're binding yourself in any way.
because they're
You're
trying
not
to do
approving
something
it.
less strict.
Right.
Much less strict. The 10th is strict, to be honest with you.
And they could also, if they decide to change use, they could also remove that second floor and go back to the original building.
Of course.
And you don't have any
All
impact
bets are off.
whatsoever.
But I just
Yeah, so-
point out, to Rich's point about placing that stuff wisely, the little sketch plan that Rick provided shows, for example, detention areas. 3 detention areas outside the property. You can't put a parking space in the detention area, so it has to be wisely provided and logically provided, but I think it can be done generally.
I guess the confusion I'm having, well, first of all, if you looked at our statement of use, you will note that it says, quote, "All storage will be in the interior." So we're not changing anything on the exterior at all. Everything remains just the same, but absolutely, we are building a mezzanine, so we're adding square footage. My point is, though, this is a waiver for the site plan for self-storage. That's what we're saying, and we're saying that we comply with your code requirements with respect to parking and everything else. Anybody else comes along, and these guys come along and they say, well, I want to rip out the floor and I want to do something else, of course they have to come back. They have to come back for site plan approval. But I guess the problem I'm having is saying to the client, we know you're not proposing this. We know there's an approved site plan. We know that you comply with the code, but for the provision that says you've got to prove out you could do the parking for all the square footage. But your code says change of use of the site from self-storage to permitted use. That's when you have to be able to prove that out. We're not changing from self-storage to a permitted use. We're going from a permitted use to a self-storage, and so that's my argument.
But read the whole
In any event,
sentence.
what I'm suggesting is I'd like to get it waived.
Yeah, but if I understand correctly, what you're doing now is adding storage space. Whether it's self-storage or otherwise, you're building on a second floor that has more storage. Although you are confining your purpose to self-storage now, if you were not confining it to self-storage now, you would have to increase your parking now.
To what they're going to show us.
So there's a change that's going on internally that is going to affect parking in the future if you change your use from self-storage, or would change parking now were you just to continue the current use of the property?
Well, he's going to self-storage, so that's,
What I'm saying is,
What you're
without
saying is
going
kinda
to
moot.
self-storage, just building that second floor causes an increase in parking.
Right,
Yeah, so
and I'm
why
saying that
this is an
if
issue.
at some later point, somebody wants to change this from self-storage, that, at that time, that person's got to come in and prove to you that in fact they comply with all of your
I
provisions.
get that too, but I'm hearing differently from our
But the
experts.
code is trying to make it that the board is not handcuffed at that point. So they're asking you to show, don't engineer it, don't do everything, but just show that the land is big enough to put this on there, and then down the road, at least you have a chance of trying to seek the approvals for it.
This use is governed by 6 different standards, I think. What Mike is referring to is one of those. So for this use, you must comply with all of that. The section Mike is reading says, in addition, you must. So I think for us to say you've complied with all of this, in addition, you must show us that parking. That's all we're saying. It's a completeness issue with respect to the material that the applicant's giving you. It's not substantive. And again, you have the right to waive this. So I think you've heard from us, and you've heard from Rick, and you can choose whether to waive it or not. That's up to you.
Okay,
So, and what I've heard, and everything, I appreciate everybody's input here, and knowing the way we like to do things and keep things neatly, I personally would like to see a geometric type plan put together for this. That's my opinion. Okay, I could put this to a vote for the board for you to grant the waiver that you're seeking. But before I do so, based in light of what you heard on our end, would you be willing to go back to your client and get us that plan?
of course I'm going to go back to my client. My concern is that he's not proposing this. I understand your code. I'm concerned about, he's going to have to engage, I presume, an architect and an engineer to lay this thing out, or a surveyor.
So interestingly,
I can't do it on the back of a napkin. so-
well, almost. So as opposed to a site plan submission that must be prepared by a licensed engineer, architect, or land surveyor, this does not. It can be prepared on the back of an envelope by someone that has a ruler. It is a conceptual
We're
layout.
not going to do that to you, so I mean,
My point is, it's a
Yeah, no,
very
okay.
easy task to do this. It's
Yes,
not a
we're willing.
burdensome exercise.
The exercise, I think, is not
Okay.
that extensive.
I
and I'd like
understand
to
what you're
see that.
saying. Let me speak to them and explain to them your position.
I appreciate that, thank you.
So hopefully we'll see you soon, and we'll have that, and we can occupy
Move
this
forward.
building and get yourself a nice big tax rateable for the town, so.
I'm sure we will.
All right, thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
What's your deadline for the submission so I can get on your next agenda?
Yesterday,
Yesterday?
yeah.
It was yesterday?
No.
That's happened to me before.
We
Rose
meet
is the
twice
best
a month.
person to get the dates.
We meet twice a month, so.
Okay.
You get it.
If you can contact Rose, she'll give you all the dates.
But I
She's-
think, Rick, you're talking about the first September meeting now.
First,
I think you'd be able to make it for the first September meeting, not
Okay.
next, not the meeting in 2 weeks.
okey-doke, thank you.
Thank you. I don't, looking at, we don't have any minutes, so.
Good night.
Good night, sir. Thank you very much. We don't have any minutes at this time, so we'll need a motion to close the meeting.
I make a motion to close the meeting?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.